We're back with the Republican Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas. He serves on both the Intelligence and Armed Services committees. Josh Earnest, the White House press secretary, he said today the military option against Iran and its nuclear programs, he says that option is sitting on the table. His words, sitting on the table if there's no deal, and the U.S. concludes that Iran is moving forward and developing a nuclear bomb. Do you support a preemptive strike to simply destroy Iran's nuclear capabilities?
Well, I'd like to see a negotiated outcome that stops Iran on all paths to getting a nuclear bomb.
Is that conceivable, do you think?
I think it would be conceivable if we would negotiate from a position of strength. Unfortunately, I don't think Iran or many of our allies adversaries in the region take that threat of force very seriously. I've spoken personally with ambassadors from the region who just say it's not believed anymore, particularly after the president walked back his so-called red line in Syria after Bashar al-Assad used chemical weapons. What we need to do is reinvigorate the threat of the use of force to drive our diplomacy, because diplomacy is always stronger when it's backed by a credible threat of the use of force.
But you don't believe the Iranians take the president's, Josh Earnest, Ash Carter, the defense secretary, said yesterday also the military option potentially is on the table. You don't think they take that seriously?
Actions have consequences, and the president drew a red line in Syria, and then he erased the red line. So right now, no, I don't think Iran, or frankly most other countries in the region, believe that the United States is willing to take military action to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon.
You think the Iranian...
That's one reason why we're negotiating from a position of weakness right now.
You think they take an Israeli threat seriously, the Iranians?
I think they take it more seriously than they take the U.S. threat. That's also why it's so dangerous to show any daylight with the government of Israel. The U.S.-Israel alliance is a core part of our strategic position in the Middle East. And to the extent that we're undermining Prime Minister Netanyahu as he forms a new government and tries to address their security concerns, we're further weakening our negotiating position.
Because we all know the Israelis destroyed an Iraqi nuclear reactor, a Syrian nuclear reactor. Do they have the capability to militarily? The U.S. probably does. They have huge bombs. The U.S. has huge bombs. But does the Israeli Air Force, the Israeli military, have that capability?
Well, if that's a question for the Israelis, obviously the United States military could destroy any of Iran's nuclear infrastructure. I'll simply quote something that a former Israeli Defense Force general said to me when I asked him this question many months ago. It can be done.
How worried are you that if these negotiations fail and Iran moves forward with its nuclear capability, other countries in the region, like Saudi Arabia, for example, may say, you know what, we need a nuclear bomb as well?
Well, Wolf, it's very worrisome. Let's just take stock of what would happen if Iran got a nuclear weapon. They're already the world's sponsor of terrorism. They're already supporting Bashar al-Assad in Syria and the Houthi militant group in Yemen. They do that without a nuclear weapon and without tens of billions of dollars in access to hard cash. Imagine what they do if they got a nuclear weapon. Second, they might use it. They continually threaten to eliminate Israel. Third, countries like Saudi Arabia probably would feel compelled to develop a commensurate nuclear infrastructure to counteract their enemies. And fourth, throughout the region, governments that might be pursuing nuclear weapons have been shown over the last 4 years to not always be the most stable government. That means the nuclear material could fall in the hands of Sunni terrorist groups like the Islamic State or Al-Qaeda. So we would be ringing the most volatile region in the world with nuclear tripwires if we let Iran get nuclear weapons capabilities.
But if the President of the United States assures the American people, assures friends in the region, whether the Israelis or the Arabs, the Saudis, the Emiratis, and others, the United States will not allow Iran to have a nuclear bomb, and all options are on the table. That means they won't have a nuclear bomb, right? That the U.S. would take military action and destroy that capability before they develop a nuclear bomb, right?
Well, unfortunately, Wolf, the president's assurances don't reassure many people in the Middle East right now. He reassured the world that he wouldn't allow Bashar al-Assad to use chemical weapons with impunity, and he walked back that promise when it was time to make a decision. So right now, those assurances do not reassure Saudi Arabia, or for that matter, many of the other Sunni countries. I mean, look what's happening in Yemen. Just last week at the Armed Services Committee, commanders in the region testified that Saudi Arabia only gave the United States government a few hours' notice before they began airstrikes against Yemen. That's inconceivable with presidents of both parties throughout the Cold War period and the post-Cold War period, because they knew they could count on American security guarantees.
You served in Iraq. You were in Baghdad. You were a U.S. military officer there. When you see what's going on in Tikrit, for example, right now, you heard our report. Arwa Damon is there. The Iraqi military has gone in. They got extensive backing from Iranian-supported militias and from the U.S. Air power, if you will. You see what's going on, your reaction?
Well, I see what happens throughout Iraq. It's just heartbreaking because, as you say, thousands of Americans died and many thousands more were wounded or maimed. fighting to protect our national security interests in Iraq. The Islamic State rose to power in part because we made a precipitous decision to withdraw our troops in 2011, but also a continuing factor in Iraq is Iran's influence. You mentioned Iranian-backed Shiite militias were fighting in Tikrit. They were led by Qasem Soleimani, the commander of the Quds Force. That's the rough equivalent of Iran's Special Operations Forces and their CIA, a man who has the blood of hundreds of American soldiers on his hands. Now, I would note that Qasem Soleimani and those Iranian-backed militias weren't able to take Tikrit, and the commanders in Iraq and the Middle East, when they testified before the Armed Services Committee last week, assured us that Iranian-backed Shiite militias had pulled out of Tikrit, and it was led by the operation that we supported with airstrikes.
Do you have any confidence in the Iraqi military at all?